You see, when an empath goes quiet, it's rarely just a pause or a moment of reflection. It's a signal, subtle but incredibly potent, that something fundamental has shifted. Emotions for an empath are not just reactions. They're their compass. They feel deeply. They sense the nuances, the undercurrents of connection, and they respond. So when that response stops, when the usual flow of attention, care, or feedback ceases, it's not a casual absence. It's a deliberate, unconscious boundary being drawn. And for an avoidant, this is seismic. Avoidants operate in a different psychological architecture. Their world is built on control, distance, and the careful calibration of closeness. They're experts at reading patterns, detecting shifts, and managing their own vulnerabilities, but they are rarely equipped to process sudden silence from someone they care about. When an empath retreats, the avoidant experiences a quiet, creeping panic. It's not always conscious at first. They might rationalize, they're just busy, they need space. They'll come back. But deep down, the avoidant senses that this silence is different. It carries a weight, a finality that words cannot convey. And here's the critical point. Silence is not emptiness. It's filled with meaning. When an empath goes quiet, they are making a decision in the quietest possible way. They are no longer negotiating, no longer filling the gaps, no longer providing the constant reassurance that avoidants have learned to rely on. And avoidants, who thrive on the subtle cues and the predictable ebb and flow of emotional engagement, suddenly find themselves in uncharted territory. The absence of response triggers an internal dialogue that can be terrifying. Have I lost them? Did I misstep? Is this over? This is where the quiet becomes transformative. Avoidants are often seen as detached, unemotional, or even cold. But the truth is more nuanced. They are highly sensitive to the emotional dynamics around them, but their sensitivity is filtered through avoidance. They can recognize shifts, but they process them internally, often in cycles of denial, rationalization, and eventual realization. When an empath withdraws, the avoidant experiences what I like to call psychological echo. The bienvenue is serme zer that amplifies every thought, every insecurity, every question about their worthiness or the stability of the relationship. And this isn't just theory, it's practical human psychology. Every relationship operates on exchange, attention for attention, empathy for empathy, energy for energy. Empaths are deeply tuned to this balance, and when they choose to step back, it disrupts the equilibrium in a way that cannot be ignored. The avoidant, who has spent so much effort maintaining control, suddenly realizes that they no longer hold the narrative. The empath's quiet communicates more than words ever could. It says, I have reached my limit. I am no longer investing. I am no longer available for this dynamic. And in that moment, the avoidant is forced to confront the reality they have long avoided, the possibility of genuine loss. So when an empath goes quiet, it is already over. Not because the avoidant caused it, not because there is malice, but because human connection is a dialogue, and the empath has chosen silence as their final word. This is the moment of awakening for the avoidant, a confrontation with their own patterns, their own limitations, and the truth that some things cannot be controlled or fixed with charm, distance, or persuasion. And here's the takeaway. Silence is not absence. It is presence in its most powerful form. It is the point where the universe, through the empath, teaches a lesson about boundaries, about respect, and about the inevitability of change. When an empath goes quiet, it is the closing of a chapter, and it leaves the avoidant with one unavoidable truth. They must either evolve or remain alone in the echo of what was. Think about fear for a moment. Not the kind of fear that makes you jump, but the subtle, persistent fear that lives inside every avoidant. It's the fear of dependence, of surrendering control, of allowing someone so close that they could actually touch the parts of us we hide, the parts we guard fiercely. Avoidants are experts at managing distance because they know that closeness, intimacy, vulnerability, these are the very things that can hurt them the most. And here's the paradox. The more they crave connection, the more they fear the very thing that connection requires. Now, enter the empath. An empath feels deeply, intuitively, profoundly. They don't just see the surface, they sense the currents beneath it. They are drawn to give, to nurture, to understand. But there's a limit. Every empath has a line, a threshold beyond which giving without reciprocation becomes exhausting, even dangerous for their own emotional well-being. And when that line is reached, the empath steps back, not out of spite, not out of manipulation, but out of necessity. This is the collision that defines the dynamic. Avoidants interpret withdrawal through the lens of fear. They see it as a rejection, a threat to their carefully maintained equilibrium. And they panic, not outwardly at first because that's not their style, but internally in quiet, persistent waves. The empath's boundary, which is an act of self-preservation, becomes a mirror for the avoidant's deepest insecurities. Suddenly, the avoidant is confronted with their own emotional limitations. When their inability to fully engage without retreating, their discomfort with vulnerability, their silent question, am I capable of sustaining connection without losing myself? The fascinating thing about this dynamic is that it is not about blame, it is about patterns. Human behavior is a conversation. Even when no words are spoken, the empath's step back is a message, and the avoidance response, whether withdrawal, testing, or anxious pursuit, is also a message. But the messages are interpreted through radically different lenses. The empath seeks balance and clarity, the avoidant seeks safety and autonomy. And when these needs clash, tension emerges, often unnoticed by outsiders, but profoundly felt by both parties. This is where the philosophical layer comes in. Avoidants fear dependence, yet the very act of withdrawing from it creates a dependence on the empath's response. It's a paradoxical loop. The avoidant needs distance to feel safe, but that distance magnifies their anxiety. When the empath enforces boundaries, they are caught in a psychological bind, and the empath's silence is the catalyst that exposes it. The quiet is not a threat to the empath. It is the truth of their own emotional limits. For the avoidant, it becomes a mirror reflecting both their vulnerabilities and their denial. And here's what is truly powerful. This dynamic teaches a lesson that extends far beyond any single relationship. It reveals the cost of avoidance, the price of never fully inhabiting your emotional world, and the necessity of facing fear directly rather than circumventing it through control or distance. The empath, by stepping back, invites the avoidant to confront themselves, to recognize their patterns, and to decide whether they are willing to evolve. So when we look at this moment, the quiet, the withdrawal, it is not a simple act. It is a philosophical truth in motion. It is the universe speaking through human behavior, saying you cannot have intimacy without courage. You cannot sustain connection without presence. You cannot avoid your fear forever. And for the avoidant, that moment is both terrifying and liberating. It is the point at which the internal architecture of avoidance is tested, and the choice becomes unavoidable. Either engage with the depth of human emotion or remain in the shallow safety of distance. The takeaway is simple yet profound. Boundaries are not punishments, they are lessons. The empath's quiet is not rejection, it is clarity. And the avoidance fear is not weakness, it is an invitation to awaken. The question is, will they answer it, or will they continue to hide behind the familiar illusion of safety? Now let's explore the subtle power of absence, the quiet force that speaks louder than any words could. When an empath steps back, when they choose silence over engagement, it's not emptiness. It's full of meaning. And for an avoidant, this absence is not merely noticed. It resonates at the deepest level. Avoidants are tuned to patterns, to the rhythms of attention and emotional exchange. But when that rhythm is disrupted, when the familiar cadence of connection suddenly halts, it triggers a response that is both psychological and existential. Imagine this. The avoidant is used to a certain flow, a predictable pattern where distance is measured and intimacy is controlled. They manage the emotional environment like a carefully balanced equation. And then without warning, the empath withdraws. The responses stop. The constant reassurance, the empathetic feedback, the subtle signs of connection, all of it falls away. What seems like silence is actually a powerful force because it carries information that the avoidant cannot ignore. It is a signal that the dynamic has shifted, that the empath is no longer participating in the negotiation of the relationship. This is where the psychology becomes fascinating. Avoidants are not unfeeling, they are highly sensitive, but their sensitivity is filtered through avoidance. They perceive the absence immediately, and their minds begin to work in overdrive. Thoughts spiral, questions multiply, and for the first time they are confronted with uncertainty in its rawest form. They cannot control the empath's silence, cannot rationalize it away with charm or distance, cannot negotiate it back into existence. The void becomes a mirror, reflecting all the things they have avoided facing: fear, vulnerability, dependence, and the reality that some forces in human connection are simply beyond their control. And the absence is not passive, it is active. Every moment that the empath remains quiet is a reinforcement of a boundary, a reinforcement of a choice. It communicates more than any argument, more than any conversation ever could. It teaches the avoidant that presence is not possession, the connection cannot be forced, and that emotional truths cannot be manufactured. Silence becomes a teacher, and its lessons are uncomfortable, unavoidable, and profoundly necessary. Philosophically, this is a moment of awakening. The avoidant is forced to confront a truth that they have long resisted. Relationships are a dialogue, a shared space of energy and attention, and withdrawal, whether from fear or protection, has consequences. The empath's quiet exposes the illusion of control that the avoidant has relied on for so long. It demonstrates that intimacy is not a puzzle to be solved, a pattern to be managed, or a resource to be rationed. It is a living, evolving exchange that demands awareness, courage, and authenticity. And here's the paradox that makes it so powerful. The very absence that terrifies the avoidant is also the opportunity for growth. It is the moment when they can either reflect, evolve, and understand the depth of human connection, or retreat further into the familiar, safe patterns of avoidance. The empath's silence is not an ending. It is a mirror, a test, a challenge, and a gift. It forces the avoidant to reckon with their own limitations, to feel the weight of genuine loss, and to consider what it truly means to connect. So when we speak about absence, don't think of it as a void. Think of it as an instrument, finely tuned and deliberate, capable of cutting through illusion and revealing truth. For the avoidant, every silent moment is an echo that demands attention, reflection, and decision. And for those willing to face it, it is the most direct route to self-awareness, emotional growth, and authentic connection. The takeaway is this: silence is not weakness. Absence is not neglect. The empath's quiet is a force that exposes the avoidance patterns and illuminates the path forward. It is a challenge to engage with reality as it is, to embrace vulnerability, and to understand that true connection can never be manipulated, controlled, or forced. It can only be experienced fully. Now let's talk about what happens inside the mind of an avoidant when the reality of an empath's silence begins to sink in. It doesn't happen all at once. There's a process, a subtle, almost imperceptible sequence of stages where the avoidant moves from denial to recognition, from rationalization to panic. It's like watching a system recalibrate itself in real time. And understanding this process gives us a window into the depth of avoidant psychology. The first stage is denial. The avoidant tells themselves consciously or unconsciously that the empath's silence is temporary, that it's a passing moment, a mood, or a miscommunication. They're busy, the avoidant thinks. They'll come back. This isn't serious. Is it pans and so? Denial is a protective mechanism, a buffer against the truth that something fundamental has changed. It allows the avoidant to maintain the illusion of control, to preserve the internal equilibrium they work so hard to protect. But denial is only a taprum tight detensal tertemi temporary shelter. Eventually, the reality begins to seep in. That's when rationalization emerges. The avoidant starts to create explanations, narratives that justify the silence without requiring them to confront the emotional implications. They analyze past interactions, replay conversations, dissect behaviors, all in an effort to construct a story where the outcome is not catastrophic. This stage is deeply intellectual, almost clinical. Avoidants are skilled at reasoning, and rationalization gives them the appearance of clarity, even as it masks the growing anxiety underneath. The third stage is where tension truly begins to mount, anxiety. Here, the avoidant can no longer ignore the absence, and the mind starts to race with questions and what-ifs. It's you, and you, and you, and so. Every unanswered message, every missed signal becomes magnified. The avoidant begins to feel the weight of the empath's quiet, not as a neutral pause, but as a potential confirmation of loss. This is where patterns of avoidance start to falter, because the mind recognizes that something outside of their control is taking place. The illusion of safety begins to crack. The fourth stage is the internal crisis, the point of reckoning. The avoidant is forced to confront what denial and rationalization have protected them from, the possibility that the relationship is truly over, or that the empath has reached a limit that cannot be negotiated or bypassed. At this stage, the internal dialogue becomes raw and urgent. Thoughts that were previously suppressed now emerge with clarity. Fear, regret, longing, the realization that some losses cannot be undone with charm, distance, or it's an intense, often disorienting moment because the avoidant must face the consequences of the emotional dynamics they have avoided engaging with fully. And here is the profound insight. These stages are not failures. They are part of a necessary psychological unfolding. The avoidance mind is learning, recalibrating, and confronting truths that avoidance has long shielded it from. Each stage is a step toward awareness, a step toward understanding the limits of control, the necessity of presence, and the inescapable reality that human connection is a living, evolving dialogue. Philosophically, this process illustrates a universal principle. Awareness follows exposure. You cannot hide from reality forever. The empath's quiet is the exposure, and the avoidance stages of realization are the awakening. Each phase, denial, rationalization, anxiety, internal crisis, is a mirror reflecting both the patterns that have protected the avoidant and the costs those patterns have exacted. So when we observe this process, it's not about judgment, it's about comprehension. It's about seeing how human beings navigate the complex terrain of attachment, fear, and intimacy. The stages reveal the deep interconnection between psychological patterns and emotional reality. They show us that avoidance is not the absence of feeling, but a particular way of negotiating vulnerability, and that the empath's quiet is the catalyst that forces the negotiation to its inevitable conclusion. The takeaway is this: the path from denial to crisis is not a sign of weakness. It is a journey of awakening. When an avoidant reaches the point of internal reckoning, they are faced with a choice: continue to live behind the safety of avoidance, or confront the truth of their emotions, embrace vulnerability, and step into authentic connection. The empath's silence has done its work. It has opened the door. The decision now lies entirely with the avoidant. Now let's consider how avoidants respond to an empath's silence. The mirror effect, if you will. This is where the psychology becomes incredibly revealing, because the behaviors we see are not random. They are reflections of internal struggle, projection, and a profound confrontation with vulnerability. Avoidants, when faced with the absence of an empath's attention or emotional presence, begin to react in ways that are both instinctual and deeply telling. Their responses are a map of their inner world, a language that speaks volumes about what they fear, what they need, and what they are avoiding in themselves. The first reaction is often withdrawal, a reflexive return to the safety of distance. It's paradoxical, but entirely consistent with avoidant patterns. On the surface, they might seem cold, detached, almost indifferent. Yet underneath, there is a storm of thought, an internal dialogue racing with questions and anxiety. Withdrawal is not just a defense. It is a survival mechanism. By stepping back, the avoidant believes they are protecting themselves from rejection, from pain, from the vulnerability that the empath's quiet has exposed. But here's the irony. This very act of retreat often amplifies the tension because it mirrors the empath's own boundary, creating a feedback loop that neither can control. Some avoidants, however, respond differently. They test. They might reach out subtly, probe with questions, or seek reassurance in ways that are calculated yet vulnerable. This testing is an unconscious attempt to regain the balance, to see if the empath's silence can be reversed, softened, or managed. It's not manipulation in the classic sense. It's a desperate, instinctual attempt to restore the flow of connection that has been disrupted. And in that moment, the avoidant is revealing their deepest truth, that control is not just a preference, it is a perceived necessity for emotional survival. There are also avoidants who react with sudden attempts at closeness, bursts of attention, or intensified charm. They flood the empath with gestures, words, or promises, hoping to reestablish what has been lost. But here's the subtle psychological truth. These attempts often reveal more about the avoidant than the empath. They expose longing, fear, and the recognition that absence is intolerable. The quiet of the empath has stripped away pretense, forcing the avoidant to confront emotions they have long avoided. In these reactions, the avoidant is both testing the empath's commitment and exploring the boundaries of their own emotional capacity. This mirror effect is profound because it illustrates a universal principle. Human behavior is reflective. The way we respond to absence, to silence, to boundaries often tells us more about ourselves than about the other person. Avoidants are confronted with their own patterns, their fears, and their limitations, while empaths, through quiet observation, create a space for that reflection. The empath's silence is not passive. It is an invitation for the avoidant to see themselves clearly, to recognize in the mechanics of avoidance, and to confront the costs it has imposed on their capacity for intimacy. Philosophically, this is a moment of truth. Avoidants often define themselves by control and distance, but the mirror effect forces them to confront the paradox. The very strategies that protect them from pain also prevent them from experiencing connection. The empath's quiet is the catalyst that illuminates this truth. It shows the avoidant that real intimacy requires presence, courage, and surrender, not calculation, not avoidance, not a careful balance of distance. So when we look at avoidant reactions, the withdrawal, the testing, the bursts of closeness, they are not failures. They are signals, mirrors of internal conflict, invitations to evolve. They remind us that human connection is a dialogue, and silence, paradoxically, is one of its loudest voices. The takeaway is this: the avoidance reactions are a reflection of what they fear and what they long for. The empath's quiet is not emptiness, it is revelation. It exposes patterns, challenges avoidance, and offers a rare opportunity for growth. The question is whether the avoidant will look into the mirror, learn from what they see, and step toward authentic connection, or turn away and remain trapped in the echo of their own fears. Silence in this sense is not absence, it is the ultimate teacher. And now we arrive at the final truth, the point where the journey of avoidance and empathy reaches its inevitable turning point, the inevitable shift, the moment when the relationship or the dynamic as it has existed is truly over. This is not a dramatic act or a single defining event. It is a slow, quiet process, unfolding in the subtle language of presence and absence. For the avoidant, it is the moment where all the defenses, all the strategies, all the rationalizations collide with an unyielding reality. The empath has withdrawn and nothing can force them back. Avoidants are masters of perception, of reading signals, of calculating how to maintain equilibrium in relationships while keeping themselves safe. And yet, when the empath goes quiet, when the usual flow of attention, energy, and emotional responsiveness ceases, all of that mastery falters. The avoidant is confronted not with a threat that can be managed, but with a truth that cannot be controlled. The quiet is absolute. It is deliberate. It carries a finality that is unambiguous, even if subtle. And in that silence, the avoidant realizes something profound. Some connections cannot be negotiated, some boundaries cannot be breached, and some losses are irreversible. This realization is not merely intellectual, it is deeply felt. Avoidants experience it in waves of emotion that they are often unprepared to process. Panic may rise, confusion, frustration, anger, sometimes at themselves, at the situation, at the world. But beneath all of this, there is also clarity, a rare, hard-won clarity that emerges when the patterns of avoidance are confronted by permanence. The empath's quiet is the mirror that reflects what avoidance has hidden. The truth that connection requires presence, vulnerability, and courage, and that without these, attachment cannot survive. Philosophically, this moment speaks to a universal principle. Nothing external can substitute for internal growth. The avoidance survival strategies, distance, rationalization, control, may have worked for years, but they reach a limit the moment an empath chooses self-preservation over engagement. This is not about punishment. It is about law. There is a natural order in human connection. Energy follows attention. Presence follows willingness. And when an empath withdraws, it is the manifestation of that principle. It teaches not through argument or persuasion, but through the inevitability of consequence. And here is the paradoxical beauty of this shift. Endings, though painful, are also openings. When an avoidant faces the truth that the relationship is over, they encounter a rare opportunity to reflect on themselves, to understand the patterns that shape their interactions, and to consider the possibility of real emotional evolution. The quiet, once feared, becomes a teacher. The absence, once dreaded, becomes a mirror. And the void, once unbearable, becomes a space where growth, awareness, and transformation can begin. For the avoidant, this is both a confrontation and an invitation. Confrontation with what has been lost, what has been avoided, and what cannot be controlled. Invitation to step into awareness, to engage with emotions fully, and to reconsider what intimacy, connection, and love truly require. The empath's silence is not the end of life, but the end of illusion. It is the final, clear, undeniable statement. Presence is earned, boundaries are respected, and genuine connection is a choice that cannot be coerced. So when we step back and look at this dynamic in its entirety, the takeaway is unmistakable. The moment the empath goes quiet is the moment the avoidant must face themselves. It is the final chapter of avoidance, the point where patterns are exposed, and the responsibility for growth is laid bare. Silence is not absence. Absence is not rejection. It is the ultimate clarity. It is the universe speaking through human behavior saying, if you wish to connect, if you wish to love, if you wish to be present in life, you must first be willing to face the truth of yourself. And that is the lesson to carry forward. Endings are not failures. They are awakenings. They are invitations to evolve. They are the mirrors in which we see our patterns, our fears, and our capacity to change. When an empath goes quiet, it is already over in one sense, but it is just beginning in another. The question is whether the avoidant will awaken to the lesson, embrace the truth, and step into the depth of connection that has always been possible, or remain in the echo of their own avoidance. Silence, in this sense, is not a void. It is the doorway to everything that comes next. So when we step back and reflect on everything we've explored today, one truth becomes undeniable. Human connection is not about control. It's not about strategy, and it's certainly not about avoidance. It is about presence. It is about courage. It is about the willingness to face fear, vulnerability, and the truths we often hide from ourselves. When an empath goes quiet, it is not a moment of punishment, nor is it a casual pause. It is a signal, a mirror, and a catalyst. It forces the avoidant to confront patterns they have long relied upon, to see the limits of control, and to reckon with the reality that some things cannot be fixed, manipulated, or bargained for. Silence, absence, withdrawal. These are not endings. They are lessons in the purest form. They are the universe speaking in a language the avoidant cannot ignore. And here's the final transformative insight. Endings are never truly the end. They are invitations, invitations to self-reflection, to growth, and to awakening. They are the chance to step into emotional maturity, to embrace authentic connection, and to understand that love, intimacy, and presence are never given. They are earned, nurtured, and consciously chosen. So, for every avoidant out there, this is the moment to pause and reflect. The empath's quiet is not rejection, it is clarity. It is the ultimate mirror, showing exactly where change is needed, where courage must rise, and where the path toward genuine connection begins. The question is simple, but profound. Will you stay trapped in the echo of fear? Or will you step through the doorway silence has opened and finally meet yourself and others with presence, authenticity, and love? Remember this: silence is not absence. Absence is not loss. It is the ultimate teacher, and the moment you recognize it as such, everything can change.